But firstly, a few sentences about me. My name is Kristen, and mm, I've been in VR since 2017. First, we started with some entertainment focus of VR and developing different different software solutions for mostly for entertainment and for marketing purposes for different companies. But starting from 2018, we have been developing educational applications only in a company called Class, and we're based in Europe, Estonia. Have a team of teachers, developers, game designers, and are focused on creating content mostly for physics and chemistry, but also supporting schools in implementing VR in education. So I will share my screen. Okay, so virtual reality in education. First, we'll talk a bit about VR. What are the differences between AR and VR, 3DoF and 6DoF? What are the main areas of use for VR? We'll talk about virtual reality school kits and educational VR applications, how to get those apps into VR glasses. What are the best practices when using VR equipment in schools? About training, how to coordinate the use of VR devices, about hygiene, solving problems, and how to organize lesson where VR devices are used. So I'll go very quickly over this. I assume that most of you already know what's the difference between AR and VR. So very briefly, with VR, the person who's using the VR device is put in the experience. So the whole screen or the whole environment is a computer game, so to say. There's no real life visible for the user. He or she is in the virtual environment. And with AR, so AR classes or ways to use AR are different. As you can see, there's kind of regular looking classes where you have either a map or some weather information or something that's project on top of what you can already see that's around you. And here is a way to use AR application for warehouses to find some specific packages and get directions for them. And it's also visualized on top of your actual environment or surroundings. Looking back, the past 7 or 8 years have been pretty evolutionary for VR. So we in 2016, we had such cardboard devices where a phone was put in, and they were very cheap, but they were also very primitive. And the experiences you could have in there were not very interactive. In most cases, you did not have any controllers at all. So fast forward to today, is that we have very powerful standalone devices that don't need any computer or any outside computing power. Everything is built in the VR headsets. You have your hands in the VR environment, and they're also very affordable. What is the difference? So you might have heard about these words, 6DoF or 3DoF, and it means degrees of freedom. And there's a video that explains uh, differences. So here are different axes, and the word degrees of freedom means how you can experience the virtual world uh, and move inside this virtual world. In 3 degrees of freedom, you can basically look around. You can't move, but you can turn your head, and the virtual experience, uh, also, or your image changes based on where you look. With six stuff, in addition to being able to look around, you can also move around, meaning you can you can experience the virtual world very naturally, and similarly, like in real life, your character can move around in this virtual space. And this is important because uh, with many of these devices, you just have to be mindful when making a purchase for your school that if those devices have some limitations technically, do they allow you to use sick stuff or educational experiences as well? In many cases, it means that they have to have those outside facing little cameras that detect the surroundings and enable the user to move around in the virtual space to enable them to have those sick stuff VR experiences as well. What are the main areas of use for VR? They could roughly be divided into three. There's visualization apps, there's experiences, and there's apps for socializing or for social experiences. If we talk about visualization, there's architecture, for example. You could go into an apartment that hasn't been built yet and see and feel how this looks. There's different showrooms, mostly for uh, technology or cars, and in many cases they're interactive in a way that those things that are visualized in the showrooms could be modified. Then there is education. Uh, for example, this here is a screenshot from photo class educational experience, and this is the point of view from the student perspective. There's training, which is also educational, but it's uh, more a simulation side of VR, where you go through something that is usually done in the real world, but is now taken put into VR, uh, and there are many reasons for that. But medical training is one of the most popular areas here. There's fitness, so which is actually one of the most popular use cases for virtual reality devices nowadays, is to do training in VR. And there's dancing, boxing, stuff like that. There's meditation. So you can imagine that in VR, how calming and nice experiences for you are available, because you can be taken anywhere. And if we talk about experiences, so to say, there are some space travel experiences and all sorts of ways to travel in VR using this medium. And there's entertainment. Remote work has been really popular for the past 3 years, and this is also something that bigger companies bet on for VR to go mainstream, is to use those devices for working together, or do work in general. There are events, and about socializing, many games, or gatherings, or uh, ways to communicate with each other while doing something in the virtual world, physically. Here, for example, they're playing disc golf and just having a good time. But our focus is on educational VR applications, and educational use in VR, of VR in general. We have made a list of 72 educational VR games, apps. And you can go and browse the list. If you go to the blog, and there's an article, educational VR games, where you can see they're divided into subjects, and we keep this list updated, so you can see on which platform these apps are available and what is the price. And if you have any recommendations, if you know any good apps that aren't listed here, then please reach out to us, and we can add those apps to this list as well. So we talked about the use cases of VR, and where to look for those educational apps. How schools usually start using VR is that they either buy those school kits from some company, or they buy headsets separately from their local electronic store. And usually with those school kits, there are VR devices. There's pre-installed educational apps, and there's some kind of a headset management solution. And if you're looking for headset management solutions, then I suggest you to look towards either Arbor XR or Manage XR. And headset, I will not go into detail, but headset management solutions basically enable you to remote launch content from your computer to multiple devices. For example, you as a teacher, you can start an educational, a specific educational VR app from your computer to 20 devices that students have are using in the class. So if you buy the kit from a company, or you already have the headsets, you can have those management solutions installed. But if you buy VR headsets to your schools, what are the first steps to take? So firstly, you should become friends with VR yourself. And it means just go ahead, put on the VR device, look how the menus work, look how the controllers work, what are the apps available there, how the navigation works, how to draw the safety boundary, and go ahead, play some games, and do some fitness training in VR. You should, if you have already become friends with VR yourself, you should involve somebody from the school as a specialist number two, somebody who can help you, who can help organize those trainings, maintain the VR fleet, be the support for teachers. Spread the information in the school that VR devices are now available, and see who reacts, who are the innovative teachers interested in using this medium in their classes. And if you already know how VR devices work, then the next step for you and other specialists would be to try out different educational applications, and either they're already pre-installed on the VR devices you bought from somebody who's focused on educational side of VR, or you have bought the VR devices from the electronic store. You can just browse different lists, install those educational applications, and then try those out, because most probably the person who's in charge of VR devices is the one who's recommending specific apps to subject teachers. So this is a very important point for you to kind of know what is around there and what's available for different teachers to give them recommendations. And the training, the workshop for teachers to get them excited about VR is also one of the first steps after you have the VR equipment in your school. And there should be some kind of a landing system, or either a calendar or any other way of knowing where the VR headsets are and who's using them at the moment. About the VR training, so you should have the plan. You should have a plan on how the training or the workshop is structured. I recommend you to have a introductory part where you just kind of go over the basics, tell the teachers what are the most important buttons, and usually it's main menu and exit, just to know that you can always go and start from the main menu, close the app, and restart whatever he or she was doing. Then if you have gone over the introduction or the basics of VR and VR apps, then I recommend you to have a practical part for an hour where you have different apps on VR headsets. Usually how we organize or recommend schools to organize these trainings is to have either little sticky notes or kind of stations where specific apps are on specific headsets. So everybody, they know that on this headset, there's, let's say, a history app, for example. And then teachers can rotate during this training and try different apps by just walking to a next station and putting on another headset. And then there's some excitement, some questions, a bit of discussion. And the main goal for the training is to have teachers to know what educational content is out there for the subject. Regarding the VR training, you should have a room. Usually it's kind of a hall or a bigger classroom where you can have the host a VR training session, or a gym, or you just need a lot of room. The readiness of VR equipment for the training day. So this goes hand in hand with the previous slide. So you should be prepared by having the educational apps installed on the devices. And during the training day, they should be charged. I recommend you to have somebody who's with you there to help out if teachers get into some kind of trouble or get stuck somewhere. And it also involves having internet in the room. Some apps might require internet connection. And also the safety boundaries so the area where this specific device can be used, I recommend to set up those areas before you host the training. And of course, the hygiene and accessories for cleaning the equipment should be available. And marketing and support team, probably you have somebody in your school who's responsible for communicating either information about trainings, workshops, or just news. Then be sure that he or she also invites teachers to attend the workshop. A very, very important part of using VR devices in your school is that you want to know where the VR devices are and who's using them at any specific moment. And this is not only important for you as the person in charge of VR devices, but also for other teachers to know how the booking process works. So there are many ways. You could have a Google Calendar. You could post information in Teams or Slack or Discord, or you could also have a really kind of old school way of just having a sheet on the wall in the place where the VR equipment is stored, and there everybody who wants to use the VR devices just go and write in the booking sheet. And when VR devices are not in use, they should have a dedicated place, and they should have some. They should have their charging cable connected so that they're charged at all times. Because one of the worst things to happen is that you start a lesson where you want to use the VR classes, and students put them on and say, "Teacher, hey teacher, it says low battery," and you have to then come up with another lesson scenario because you can't use VR devices, or you wanted to use 10 of them, but only 3 of them have full battery. So please keep them charged in the place where you store VR devices. And instructional materials is also something that's important. You should have step-by-step guides, and I also recommend to print those out and put them in the place where you store VR devices. So either it's a protocol on how to put them back so that everybody knows that they're charging, or how to prepare for VR lesson, or any of those topics. And teachers should know who's the go-to person in their school regarding their problems or their ideas about VR. And they should also know what is the channel where they can post their ideas, because many times the idea might or problem might be lost. And for you or anybody else who's maintaining the fleet in their school, when you're troubleshooting some kind of a problem, you want to know the details about it. So if there are some digital channels for communication regarding VR, uh, you should encourage teachers to, if they have a problem, take a screenshot, share it right there, because then you're able to solve whatever happened to the specific device. Yeah, and this is also about the instructional materials, which uh, which are very important. And once a month, uh, to go over the VR equipment, do the software update, see if any apps require updates, or if there's any controllers or some physical damage for that done to any of the VR headsets that require attention. So you should have disinfection tools available where the VR equipment is kept. Usually it's a pack of wipes and spray. And if you have a training, then be sure to show teachers what are the surfaces that should be cleaned using those wipes and spray. Usually, mm, the manufacturer's guide or uh, instructions book doesn't want you to clean the lenses, but uh, in the 6 or 7 years that I have hosted those VR trainings, I found out that usually nothing happens if you don't have any uh, kind of mm, if you don't have any of those wipes that are with like very strong liquid in it, then cleaning the lenses is also okay. But mostly you should clean the surfaces that are in touch with skin. Make sure that the cleaning instructions are passed on to students so that if teachers know how to clean the devices, the students should also know. And a good practice is that students themselves, they clean the devices after they use. And since there's electronic components in the VR device, you shouldn't turn the headset upside down after cleaning. So after you put some liquid on it, and in general, even after a heavy use, when students might sweat, it's not a good idea to turn the headset upside down because moisture might get into the headset to the electronic components. You want to store the devices in kind of a regular horizontal way. And yeah, you should keep in mind to follow manufacturers' instructions regarding the specific headsets that you're using. So using optical glasses, I will show that. So I have very large frames in my optical glasses, and to be honest, these do not fit very well here. But most of the regular glasses usually fit inside the VR headset, so that you can just say to students that go ahead and try out like this, and if your glasses fit in, then you can leave them on when using VR. Because if you have uh, optical glasses, then If you take them off and you don't see very well, then it's the same in the VR environment. That with glasses, it's a lot better experience. I recommend you to have a troubleshooting guide. We have made one, and you can use it if you want to. And the essence of this troubleshooting guide is you have a problem, what are the possible causes of the problem, and what are the recommended solutions. And this could be turned into a video or whatever format, but a very compact PDF has proven to be a good way. So teacher identifies what's wrong and then tries to find solutions themselves before turning to the support or colleagues who know more about VR. And one paradox with VR is that many teachers are afraid of using VR because of themselves, not because of the students. Because usually students, they're very familiar with such tech, and they need very little instructions on how to use those VR devices. They just put them on and they already know how to navigate. So it's very important to create a comfortable environment for teachers. Uh, and I encourage you to encourage them to use the VR devices at home, test different content, get familiar with the menus, controllers, and kind of some errors that might come up. The training session that you host should be hosted in a relaxed atmosphere, and please avoid rooms where students or other teachers can see the participants, because it might create an atmosphere where they don't feel very confident. If you have support and instructional materials available, then you can be sure that it's a lot smoother ride for everybody, for the teacher and for the support team as well. There are no stupid questions. All the things that teachers want to know, you should get the answers to them. And there's only one thing. If the questions are very specifically about the content in some specific app, then the answer should be to encourage them to find it out, because it's part of the experience. It's part of knowing what the content is about, is to discover, play the game. And this is something that probably is asked most by the teachers. What app can I use in my classes? So you should have an answer for that. For history, it's this. For physics and chemistry, it's this. For math, you can use this app. So, and for students, it's also very important to teach the student to fish. So you shouldn't give them fish itself, but teach them how to fish. Creating the safety boundaries, navigating in the menus, cleaning the VR device. So all of those things, students should be available. Students should be doing those things themselves, because the workload uh, is just too much for teachers to kind of do this before and after of every class. And it's very important for students to kind of be native with VR if the VR devices are used in multiple subjects. And one very practical thing is that if there's a lot of makeup worn, then the cleaning process is longer, and the people who are wearing the makeup, they might not want to put on the VR glasses. So it's kind of a delicate topic, but uh, I'm sure teachers can handle those, or just communicate beforehand that we will have a VR session on this day. So be mindful that you will be putting something on those VR glasses, and yeah, the makeup will be not very. Um, yeah, it's good to have less of that. Regarding public spaces, so it's a bit the same with students as it is with teachers, although on a different level. But uh, with teachers, it's mostly about the confidence. But with students, it's just that if there are other students around that aren't in VR, they might disturb the player, which kind of gets them out of the flow of enjoying the educational VR experience, or mm, or they might think how they look in front of their classmates while having this VR headsets on. So I encourage you to not use VR in public spaces, but rather do those VR lessons in the regular classroom. You might just have to move tables a bit, but this could be also done by the help of the students themselves. And many schools we know are using VR devices have IT students. So those are students who help teachers regarding ICT problems, or help them to implement new ICT solutions. Uh, and they also help those VR classes to be updated, to be maintained, to be prepared for some specific lessons. So, and they might get as a reward, they might get some extra time to use VR devices for their own projects, or might like have a say in the uh, like when budgeting for new apps, what apps to use. So I uh, I I feel it's a very good way to involve students that are interested in this. So using VR glasses in the lessons. mm, Usually there's kind of two avenues for VR to be used. One is group work, and another is individual use. So individual use is when everybody are who are in the class have their own VR device, and they go through the learning process from start to finish by themselves. Group work is usually carried out when the school does not have enough VR headsets for everybody, and which is uh, most of the schools, to be honest. Mm, then a group work format is a good way. And then there's groups of two, three, four usually. I don't recommend you to have bigger groups than four. And then the VR device is passed on, and this is part of the learning experience. And with individual work, usually either the whole educational experience is in VR or it's combined with a worksheet. So the student has has some exercises on the worksheet, and part of this is to go through some kind of an educational uh, experience in VR. And of course, these worksheets could be in uh, online as well. You have to be mindful that this individual work requires everybody to have a VR headset, so it needs more space than group work because there's just more VR headsets being used. With group work, mm, there's either there's usually two ways. It's either a station-based design, and which is usually used when there's very few of those headsets available. Let's say two, three, four. Then in one or two stations there are VR headsets, and there are other exercises in other stations, and then groups just rotate from station to station. Or another way of having group work with VR devices is if every group has one VR device and some specific tasks are in VR. Or for example, we have developed some virtual escape rooms for chemistry and physics. And so the idea is to get out of this virtual room using your chemistry knowledge. And usually how it's done is somebody is in VR and they have to communicate with others who help them to solve the problems or tasks inside this virtual escape room. And it's very efficient because they have to communicate with each other, use the chemistry terminology to arrive to an answer. How to support students when they're stuck somewhere in the VR experience. Usually, to avoid these things is the teacher should know what the VR experience is about. Then the student just explains what's happening, and the teacher might help by just stating what is the next step to do. If this does not work, then you can of course take off the headset from student's head and look into where he or she is at, and just give some guidance. Sorry. In Photo class, we have something called Teacher Portal, and in this Teacher Portal, teachers can see where each of the student is at with their progress, and it makes it a lot easier to guide them towards the next step. With those MDMs, mobile device management solution is RBRXR or Managed XR. You can also cast the VR device's screen. So this is something that's not available for all VR devices, but for some specific models. But it means you can see inside each headset from your computer. So this makes it a lot easier for teachers to know what is happening in each of the headsets. So again, when organizing a VR lesson, headsets should be booked, charged. The content you want to use should be available on all the headsets, and all the headsets should have their controllers and parts that belong to each of the headsets. Mm, the room should be set up in a way that if the students are more experienced, then they can move the tables or do the stuff needed themselves. But yeah, first during first sessions, you should kind of set up the environment before the class. It just makes the process more smoother. And if you know already that students have used VR in some other subjects, then it might help you because they're helping each other and they're more experienced, and then you can skip the kind of introductory part of mm, going over the basics. Okay, so this is it from me. If you have any questions, then you can always email me or add me on LinkedIn and uh, send me some messages regarding your questions.